Welcome to Mid-Century Living, your weekly nostalgia podcast about the best of technology and culture from the mid-20th century.
Welcome back to Mid-Century Living, the show where we talk all about the best of the mid-20th century and how to add vintage vibes to your modern life. We are your hosts, Gonzalo.
And Jackie, thank you for joining us today. So today we're talking about 1940s fashion, but first, Gonzalo, how was your week?
My week was great. Also, I'm really excited to be talking about fashion because we've done all the fashion episodes and we've never done 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
But more on that later. My weeks were great because those of you who listened to last week's episode about the MCM chairs, we mentioned that Jackie had gotten snow and that I was forecasted to get snow. And we got snow in Houston and it was great. And it was fluffy. It wasn't like ice. It snowed most of like a Tuesday, like from the early morning and then all day Tuesday. So we had like a good 4 inches of snow outside.
Nice.
And it was like fluffy snow. Like people were out doing like snow angels and snowmen and stuff like that. My neighbor across the street was trying to make a snowman, but he was gathering snow from his car with a shovel. I was like, no. Here, borrow my snow brush.
I'm happy for you. As we discussed last week, I'm over snow, but I'm happy for you that you had a good snow day. Or day or two.
Yeah, it was fun. We had 2 days. It was 2 days off school tacked on to a Monday that was already a holiday. And I didn't have to work that Friday because I had a competition to go to. So I only worked 1 day of the week.
Good for you. That's awesome.
Yes. But no, it was fun. I stayed inside most of the time though. Like I went outside to like walk around the snow and like see the snow and touch the snow and be like, oh, it's cold. And then I was talking to Alex, who listens to the show. Hello. And he's like, you should go out in the Jeep. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll go out in the Jeep. And then I started to. I was like, I don't have anywhere to go. I don't need to go. So I went inside and I lit a fire in the fireplace and I drank coffee.
That sounds more pleasant for sure than going out trying to Jeep in the snow. I am happy for me that it didn't snow that week that you got snow. It's actually finally getting warmer. Like now we're in acceptable winter temperatures where like the low is in the like upper 30s and the highs are in the like upper 40s. And this is the kind of cold that I'm okay with. But yeah, weekly catch-up wise, I don't have anything really to report, except for now that the weather is a little bit better, I'm starting to feel productive again. I'm not sure what it is about cold, but if it's cold outside, I don't want to do anything inside except for stay warm. I don't know. Well, that was boring. Sorry, everybody.
No, it's fine. You just, need to learn to love the snow, and that's it.
No, I never want to be cold again. I don't want to be cold ever. So what isn't boring is 1940s fashion, which, as you mentioned earlier, is the 1 decade from our 3-decade span that we're doing that we haven't covered for fashion yet. So everything in today's episode came from my favorite vintage fashion resource, vintagedancer.com, who has also been the main source for all of our fashion episodes. It has very thorough fashion histories and shoppable links. I will talk more about the shoppable links later, but credit where credit is due, vintagedancer.com is the best. So before we get more specific into individual pieces of fashion, I thought we'd start with a quick summary. So women's 1940s fashion was about creating an hourglass silhouette that started from the shoulders down. So it's padded shoulders, nipped-in waists, and A-line skirts. I'm doing the shape with my hands. It's really like triangle, not like an hourglass, really. Anyway,
okay.
So this was the everyday shape for clothing, from suits to dresses. Yes, women wore suits. More on that later. Shoulder pads were invented in the 1930s, but were still incredibly popular in the 1940s. Every dress, blouse, or jacket was fitted with shoulder pads that extended just past the edge of the shoulder. This made for a square neckline and shoulder angle. And after World War II began, women's fashions became even more militarized. Jackets, coats, and even dresses were influenced by the masculine styles, and shoulder pads became even bulkier. With the start of the war and strict rationing on fabric, dresses in the 1940s became shorter. Whereas the 1930s featured dresses that went down to mid-calf, the 1940s brought them back up to knee length. So we learned in our other fashion episodes that skirts are going to get longer and fuller in the 50s and get shorter and slimmer again in the 60s. So for more on those fashion eras, don't forget to check out our other 2 episodes, and we'll link them in the show notes.
Regarding the men, some of the key details of 1940s men's fashion are the high-waisted and wide-legged trousers, wide lapel suit coats and sport coats, white collared shirts, colorful and wide neckties, two-tone Oxford shoes, and wide-brim fedora hats. 1940s men's fashion was styled to make a man feel, quote, larger than life. During World War II, the fabric rationing affected menswear as well. Men's 1940s suit pockets would not have flaps, trousers could not be more than 19 inches around or be cuffed, and suits were sold without vests or waistcoats. But men loved cuffed pants, and quickly they figured out you could purchase longer length pants and cuff them at home. In Britain, the men's 1940s clothing restrictions were harsher. Jackets could not have pleated backs, metal zippers, or buttons, feature raglan sleeves, or have belts.
So, casual day dresses were modest, revealed very little skin, and there was no cleavage. The 1940s dresses had a variety of necklines: square, slit, sweetheart, keyhole, shirred, cross front like a wrap dress, or even V-necks if it was a shirtwaist dress. Sleeves were usually short to just above the elbow. Puff sleeves were the most popular in the early to mid-40s, but eventually cap sleeves also became popular. Dresses from the early years didn't have any pleats or gathers because it wasted fabric, but in the later 40s, they could introduce some pleats and even wider A-line skirts and even included some pockets. Yes, the fabric restriction would have restricted pockets too, so it was a sad time.
Is is that why women's clothing has no pockets usually? Is it just like a callback to like the fabric being restricted?
I think it's mostly because fashion designers feel like a pocket will distract from the silhouette they're trying to create, like they don't want bulk there. So evening dresses were spaghetti strapped or halter topped and revealed shoulders and chests, but only mild cleavage. Skirts were long and sleek in the early years and fuller by the end of the decade. So some of the most popular 1940s day dress styles were shirtwaist dresses. This was by far the most common 1940s dress. Instead of buttoning up the back like dresses used to be before the 40s, this time the buttons are in the front and they slip over the head and button down the front with large buttons, and 4 to 6 buttons that extended just to the waistline. And the shirtwaist dress was so comfortable and easy to put on and so versatile for most occasions that they remained popular throughout the 1950s and well into the 1980s. Button-down dresses were kind of like shirtwaist dresses, except for this time they button all the way down to the hem. So by the mid-40s, buttons didn't just run down the center front, they actually were placed off-center, usually going diagonally from the shoulder down. Another popular dress style were nautical, sailor, or patriotic dresses. So nautical or sailor-inspired designs were favorites in summertime. Usually dresses were all blue with buttons and white stripes. This sailor theme was worn with skirts, pants, play suits, shorts, and swimsuits too. Many 1940s dresses also had blue and red or red and white color combinations as well. These patriotic colors showed a woman's support for her country. This is probably my favorite look of the 40s, actually. I love all the nautical Americana outfits.
It's so subtle, but it's so also like, I don't know, call back to how patriotic people were during the war.
It just screams
Like I don't
summer
like
to
you
me,
don't
too.
see that anymore.
Yeah, next time I go on a cruise, I need to make a whole bunch of like cute nautical outfits like this because I love them. So one last casual dress style that was really popular in the 40s are peasant dresses. They were very popular in the summertime, especially with teenagers. This dress had a gathered neckline and really puffy sleeves or elastic gathered crop sleeves. The skirt had gathered waistbands and sometimes also had ruffles along the bottom. And this peasant style was renamed the Gibson Girl around 1947, and ruffle-trimmed blouses, long full skirts, contrast trimming, bow neckties, and dramatic sleeves gave a nod back to the Edwardian era. Anyway, so getting away from casual dresses, a little bit on evening gowns. 1940s evening dresses and gowns were simple but shiny, so the designs were a little bit more casual than anything in the decades before or after, but what made 1940s evening wear look formal was the use of decoration. Sequins, applique, and beads were not rationed or restricted, so they were used to embellish dress bodices, jackets, and sweaters. They added sparkle while keeping costs down. The early 1940s continued some of the 1930s style, column gowns and Grecian wraps, with iconic 40s puff sleeves and an hourglass waistline. The late 1940s, the ball gown silhouette shortened to the new ballerina length. They looked similar to cocktail dresses, but they could be formal enough for a ball. They showed off your shoes and a bit of leg. This youthful look was embraced first by teens and young women, but it wasn't long before all women were wearing party dresses in the new length.
For men, the suits during the 40s were worn every day. Whether they were going to an office job, to a picnic, or out to dinner, men were wearing suits. Even working classes and poor men tried to own at least one suit or sport coat to wear to church on Sundays and for special events. Men's suits were usually made from thick wool, worsted wool, or tweed. During the war, suits were usually made from synthetic rayon blended with wool. Colors were muted: black, navy, gray, dark brown, tan, and medium blue. During the summer, lighter fabric colors were medium gray, brown, medium blue, teal, and tan. White and ivory suits, which had been incredibly popular in the 1930s, faded away during the 40s, and by the end of the decade, these colors were only worn in tropical climates. Despite the muted colors, men's 40s suits usually had patterns to them. Tweed, herringbone, check, pinstripes, and plaid were very popular student patterns. The single-breasted jacket had 2 to 3 buttons, wide padded shoulders, patch or slit pockets, and tapered into a waist slightly. The lapels were wide notch or peak with rounded edges. Now, double-breasted jackets were even more popular in the 40s for the extra width it cost, although sales were restricted during the war years. Wartime also saw the end of the suit vest because they were considered wasteful during the time, and the trend held on after the war. The more popular opinion was to wear a knit sweater vest with suits or sports coats. Regarding shirts and pants, men's 1940s shirts were very colorful. White was an option, but most men chose blue, tan, yellow, green, or gray shirts in solid, thin stripes, or pin dot patterns. Shirts were always worn tucked in, with an optional single pocket on the chest. 1940s suit trousers were usually flat-fronted or with single pleats. They were worn at the high waist, above the belly button, with a 3-inch wide waistband. Trouser legs were wide around the thigh, knee, and slightly tapered at the ankle. Usually, suit trousers were either straight hemmed at the bottom, as required during the war, or had a 2-inch trouser cuff, which most American men preferred, which is a trend that I'm very for during wartime because I do not like cuffs on my suit pants.
Interesting.
Really, it makes me feel like I got a suit when I was a little kid that was too big so I could grow into it, and my mom hemmed or cuffed the bottom, which is what happened. No, I like half cuff, period, or a quarter cuff even. Anyway, suspenders were still worn by men in the 1940s, although belts were more popular. In the 1940s, men's suspenders came in thick elastic stripes with button loops. So these buttons are sewn into the inside waistband of the pants or the trousers and attached to the suspenders, or really, you attach the suspenders to those buttons. The clip-on suspenders came into fashion in later years. I like button suspenders. I feel like they look more authentic than the clip-on kind. Even that being said, I only have clip-on ones, but I've got multiple suspenders that I never wear. In the 1940s, neckties were made exclusively from silk, rayon, and wool. They were panel ties, which means they were made from one piece of fabric, and fairly wide, 3.5 to even 4.5 inches. 1940s ties were also worn short, up to 2 inches above the pants waistband, which was already worn high on the waist, which I'm going to take a stand and say how wrong this is.
It is definitely a look.
And I get it. That's 1940s that we're talking about. But, okay, I don't like wide ties. To me, 3 inches is way too much on a tie. Like 1.5 is a little bit too skinny. 1 is definitely no. So like 2.5 is like the sweet spot. But also, growing up, I was always taught that the tie tip touches the belt. So like not like over the belt, because that's too long. But you have to touch the waistband, the waist, I guess, the line of the pants. If not, it's too short. So this bugs me.
Wide ties, wide pants, wide jackets, wide. I'm just,
it's
a look.
Not a big fan of wide. It's not a look that I would never wear a Zoot Suit either.
More on that later.
Men in the 40s loved patterned ties, large geometrics, Curly lines, monograms, animals, plants, flowers, birds. Western and tropical themes were everywhere. More on the flowers when we get to the etiquette. Men's 1940s ties were often themed around the wearer's hobbies and interests. The crazier the tie, the better. No 1940s suit would be complete without a pocket square. These were made from rayon or silk after the war and were often bright colored, or they had paisley or other classic patterns. In the 1940s, men's pocket squares were folded into a triangle and placed open side up, exposing 2 or 3 tips. I always wear a pocket square when I wear a tie.
Good. So women also wore suits, as I hinted at earlier. So the shortage of fabric also caused the popularity of the two-piece suit for women, known as the victory or utility suit. Women could mix and match skirts, blouses, and jackets for a new outfit every day. Even after the war, the suit remained popular due to its comfort and practicality. Suit skirts were A-line, not pencil skirts, and that meant that they flared out gradually from the hip to the knee. Blouses could be worn long-sleeved or short, with puffy gathers and tight wide cuffs at the wrist. They usually buttoned down all the way and had a small V-neck or round Peter Pan collar neck opening.
But let's talk about suits. In the 1940s, suits were an extremely loose, long, and wide 2-button suit jacket with large notched lapels, with huge shoulder pads worn over extremely baggy trousers that came about halfway up the ribs. It's definitely a style.
Yep.
Suit pants tapered at the bottom to a very tight cuff at the ankle and were held up with suspenders. They often were pinstriped yellow, green, bright blue, or purple fabrics. Now, suits had been popular at the start of the 30s, but by the time the 40s rolled around, the suits were strongly associated with criminals. These oversized suits went against fabric rations and were seen as unpatriotic. Despite the suit style being considered unpatriotic during the war, however, afterward the style inspired the new men's look of the late 1940s and early 50s, meaning large double-breasted baggy suits with high waists, pleated trousers, and wide brim hats returned to fashion.
So now that we're done talking about fancy clothing, let's talk about casual clothing. So women's casual clothing, you're right, it's pants. Pants or trousers were primarily a menswear item up until the 1940s, but women working in factories needed safe clothing that wouldn't snag in machinery. So at first women just wore men's pants, but eventually manufacturers started making pants for women, although they still looked pretty masculine. They were very high-waisted, buttoned or zipped down the side, and had full legs. They were made of cotton, denim, or wool blends. Women wore them at work, but they soon became a part of their casual wardrobe at home. It didn't take long before women were wearing pants in public, although it would take many more decades before pants were allowed at school or professional jobs. Overalls and coveralls were another workwear turned sportswear option for women. They were made of blue denim or sturdy cotton, and they have become a symbol of the 40s thanks to Rosie the Riveter. In the UK, land girls of the Women's Land Army wore overalls and trousers while farming, and that was another popular look over there too.
When you say 1940s casual, like I'm thinking, like to me, like it's like what now people call mom jeans and like bandana covering the hair.
Yeah.
Lady of the house
No,
does
it's
housework.
I love the like 1940s button down the side like wide leg trousers. Those are actually my favorite kind of vintage style pants. But the like adorable fitted overalls are very cute also. I don't have any. Wearing that much denim just sounds uncomfortable in Texas. It's too hot here.
Yeah, it's really interesting to whenever we talk about like the amount of fabric people had in these time periods. I mean, I get that the 40s fabric was not a thing, but they're still wearing a lot of fabric compared to what we wear today. There was no AC,
No.
or it was very limited.
Yep.
Like people still lived in Houston at the time, and I'm sure I get climate change and all that stuff. We're not here to discuss that, but it was still hot back then.
Yeah, I think about that all the
Like
time.
it's like the heat of Texas is not something that's new.
I guess if you've never had air conditioning, you're just better adapted to being hot. Like everyone just must have been hot all the time.
If
And
you're
that's
always
just
hot, you don't
the
know what being
way-
comfortable is like.
Right. Like, I think the heat feels probably worse to us because we have air conditioning to compare it to. But if you never had air conditioning,
Yeah, but like,
that's just life.
but they had winter.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. I think about that a lot, actually.
Back to 1940s clothes. So, for men who didn't wear suits to work, a collared shirt and work trousers in a sturdy cotton twill or gabardine were the way to go. 1940s work trousers had flat fronts with single leg crease. The leg widths were also generally narrower than men's suits or casual pants. Workwear trouser colors were fairly basic: tan, brown, navy, and hunter green. And a matching trouser and shirt set was common for most lines of blue collar work in the 1940s with a solid color tie. Sturdy cotton canvas coveralls were worn by men that had to get dirty in the job. In the 1940s, men's coveralls were all one piece that buttoned down through the fly with straight leg. They were belted at the waist, had long sleeves for protection, and typically featured a pointed collar. They also had big patch pockets for the chest for keeping tools handy. Sidebar, I have one of these.
Really? Cool.
It says Exxon on it. It actually says Esso because it's old. It's before Exxon existed.
Neat.
Denim overalls were another 1940s workwear clothing choice preferred by farmers. Post-war casualness opened the floodgates for 1940s men knit shirts, vests, and pullovers to dominate after-work casual hours. Men's knitted shirts were made of textured rib knits that fit very snugly with a wide rib bottom at the smaller ribbed sleeve and neck bands. Neckbands were almost always round and high on the neck. Knit sweater shirts could be worn tucked into pants or untucked. They came in solid colors and white stripes, but also came in lots of fun novelty prints. Chain links, diamonds, fair isle, zigzag, plaid, and argyle patterns were trendy and colorful. Men's 1940s pullover sweater vests, which we mentioned earlier, were usually worn tucked into pants. Solid colors, wide horizontal stripes, and Norwegian designs for winter were especially common. The jersey knit t-shirt was a newer casual men's clothing item in the 1940s. Initially, t-shirts were considered underwear, but in the military, men became accustomed to wearing their undershirts without an overshirt. One more popular style for casual days in the 40s, the Hawaiian aloha shirt, featured hand-painted tropical scenes, birds, and flowers. These shirts were worn untucked and fit rather loose. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that they're Jackie's preferred 1940s menswear shirts.
I don't know. 1940s men's casual rocks. I am torn between, like, of course I still love an aloha shirt. And those pretty much look the same as they always did. And I'm glad that that's a style that just stayed around. But probably, yeah, those 1940s knit tops are my favorite. And they don't really exist as much anymore. But I love an aloha shirt, mainly because I love tiki. For more on tiki, there's an episode about that that we might link in the show notes. Okay, so now that we've covered fancy and casual, we should probably talk about shoes. So women's shoes in the 1940s lacked the elaborate detailing of the 30s and were mostly plain, sturdy, and chunky. What makes them special is not the style, but the material. Leather was needed for the war, so shoes instead came in velvet, mesh, reptile skins, and even all wood, like clogs.
Fun.
Heels were short and thick in the early 40s and slightly thinner in the late 40s. The 1940s were notable for popularizing wedge heels. Another popular style were peep toes, and they could be seen on pumps, sandals, and wedges. For casual outfits, women wore Oxfords and saddle shoes. These single or two-tone shoes resembled men's shoes with a rounded toe. Slip-on loafers were also an alternative to Oxfords, and they were all the rage with teenagers and working women.
The most common for men, though, everyday shoe was the lace-up Oxford. Most Oxfords were dark leather brown with a thick sole and sturdy heel. Details could include some brogue, which are small perforations and are preferred by your co-host here, on the toe, or in fancy wingtip pattern, which also wingtip is the way to go. Solid black was another option for formal suits and dark clothing, as was white for light summer suits. Other casual options were moccasin-style loafers, sandals for summer, winter boots, and sneakers for sports.
So while we're talking about accessories, let's talk about women's hats. So headwear in the 1940s was actually very diverse, but there were a few new styles that became trademarks of the 1940s. First was the beret, which is a one-piece, round, flat, French-inspired hat that sat directly on top of the head or angled off to the side. And the next was the turban, which is a piece of fabric wrapped around the head and decorated with flowers, feathers, or jewels.
During the 40s, every man had a hat on his head. Men's 1940s hats were made in wool felt and came in colors gray, black, dark brown, tan, or cream. The brim was usually bound in Petersham ribbon that circled around the crown and ended with a flat bow on the side, sometimes with feathers. The fedora, also called a trilby, was by far the most widely worn style. It had a 2.5 to 3-inch brim and a tall pinched front crown with a center crease that was either flat topped or angled to the back. Other popular felt hat of the 1940s was the Homburg. The crown was quite tall with a moderate center crease. The brim was curled all around, but especially on the sides, creating an oblong-shaped fit. However, the most unique hat of the 1940s was the pork pie hat. Similar to the Victorian gambler hat, it came in black or brown fur felt and featured a short oval flat top with deep crease around the oval. In tropical climates, wool hats were too hot. Instead, woven straw hats in the shapes of fedoras, pork pies, and boaters were worn.
That's basically it for 1940s fashion, but before we wrap up, I wanted to mention that another exciting thing about the 1940s was that this was the first time fashion companies started taking plus-size clothing seriously. Plus-size fashion in the 1940s was not overlooked like it had been in previous decades. Catalogs and department stores now carried stout-size clothing lines with dresses, tops, coats, and shoes in designs that were more flattering to the full figure. In the 1940s, catalogs even included photographs of plus-size women in the clothing. In the 20s and 30s, if they had any plus-size clothing, it was usually line drawings, which included some like artistic liberties that were neither accurate to women's real shapes nor to the clothing itself. So we can
Huh.
be grateful for that.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings us to our connection to today. I mentioned them at the top of the episode, but really, your one-stop resource for all your vintage fashion needs should be vintagedancer.com. In addition to having all of these really thorough fashion histories, they also curate these really incredible shoppable links for vintage fashion from every decade. And she even has a pretty big list of men's high-waisted pants, which are really hard to find these days, so I recommend starting there if you're looking for 1940s fashion. We'll include links in the show notes. Also, if you're in Europe, UK-based Vivian of Holloway makes a lot of very accurate 1940s women's wear in modern sizes. They're famous for their Catherine trousers and raglan blouses, and they have a lot of beautiful 1940s dresses as well, and lots of prints and colors. But now that we're caught up to the present, it's time for our etiquette segment. Gonzalo, what do we have today?
All right, so y'all should be very proud of me today because I have etiquette that is 100% on brand with today's episode topic.
Nice.
Because we talked about 1940s fashion, so today's etiquette is focusing on a chapter titled The Clothes of a Gentleman from Emily Post's book Etiquette, the Blue Book of Social Usage, published in 1947.
Nice.
Which also, quick thank you to the Internet Archive, an online library that has uploaded scans of thousands of books that you can check out to read. They've been a great source for researching for episodes, but also for our etiquette. This is where I got today's book. So check them out at www.archive.org. Anyways, Emily Post says that, quote, although the clothes a man chooses are almost as certain to reveal his background as his speech, fashion is not important. She advises that if you would like to dress like a gentleman, you must study the subject of a gentleman's wardrobe by paying close attention to the clothes of men of about your own age, whom you know to be reliably conservative. Meaning that at least until your judgment is trained enough to pick out good suits from what she calls freaks. We mentioned in the episode that men wore suits every day in the 1940s. One staple suit was the sack suit or the business suit, which had been popular for a few decades prior to the 1940s, but remained popular throughout. It's really just the name of the suit, which took its name from the way it was cut, not because it was fit loosely like a sack. The business or three-piece suit is supposed to be an everyday, inconspicuous garment, but here are some rules to follow. Don't get too light a blue or too light a green or anything that suggests a horse blanket, which is really just a cover for a horse. I had to Google what a horse blanket was.
Wow.
Like to keep it warm. Yeah. Now, we covered the colors earlier in the episode, but don't get too light of these colors. Don't choose striking patterns or materials. Instead, choose woolen materials. They come in endless varieties. Choose a material that looks plain at a short distance, which is what Emily Post considers safe.
Wow.
Regarding trousers, even I guess outside of the war rationing. They may be made with a cuff, but sleeves on like a shirt should not have cuffs. Skirt, wide trousers are bad.
Fair.
It's funny that women's clothing had padded shoulders because for men, padded shoulders are what Emily Post calls an abomination.
Wow.
Silk socks are only acceptable in the evening. Just don't wear white socks unless you are wearing cotton ones with white tennis shoes. And don't cover yourself with chains, fobs, scarf pins, lodge emblems, etc. Accessories for the business suit: shirt and collar, anything you like except for polo. Regarding shoes, any of brown or black leather, just not pattern leather. Socks in wool and silk, plain or pattern, but avoid striking mixtures of color, which I break this rule often because I always wear bright colored socks. For ties, plain or figured, but avoid flowered designs and stiff satin textures. And keep very little jewelry. It's for utility, not for ornament. Emily Post's book also outlines appropriate clothes for various occasions in her chapters about clothes. She advises that if you are ever in doubt, the best rule is to err on the side of informality. So if you're not sure whether to put on your dress suit, like a tailcoat, or a tuxedo, like a dinner coat, wear the latter. Regarding the business suit, it is for every ordinary, everyday occasion in town. It's for traveling as well, and the coat of a blue flannel suit can be worn with a white flannel or duck trousers for a lunch, to a church, or out in the country. Basically, Emily is saying, if you must be eccentric in your choice of clothes, save your efforts for the next fancy dress ball, like a costume party. But in your business clothing, be reasonable. And also, if a salesman offers you anything that has, quote, never been seen before, then the good rule of thumb to follow is to shun it, unless your judgment is very experienced. So what do you think about this suit-related etiquette for men in the 1940s?
You know, I was thinking this is like crazy strict, and then I remembered that she's mainly talking about business suits.
Yeah, this was just for the business suits.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure every time we've covered fashion or work etiquette, everyone has said that you should just blend in and try to just be practical and sensible and not draw attention to your fashion because you're there to work, you're not there for a fashion show. So really this etiquette is appropriate to the occasion.
Yeah.
What's tricky about this one though is that since men wore suits every day all day, even when they weren't at work, some of these rules seem a little mean. Like if they wanted to wear something a little bit more wild on the weekend, I don't know where that would fall in her acceptable use of patterns and colors. But if we're talking strictly business wear, I don't think this is like too crazy. I don't know. How do you feel about it?
Yeah. I don't think it's too crazy. I think it's fine for like work / stopping by the store to go home on your way home, or like,
Church.
weekday going out, church, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, there's two things that I would not give the stamp on. One, the socks, because I like colorful socks. But also, she said that she advises that if you're ever in doubt, to err in the side of informality.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been the other way around. Like if I'm not sure, I would rather be more formal than
Overdressed.
not enough formal. Yeah, overdressed than underdressed.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I agree.
If it was up to me, I like these. I would give them the stamp, except for specifically that one. The socks one, I can get. It's a rule, and I'm just weird. But I would advise listeners to always err on the side of formality. So
Yeah, I agree with that. So we'll approve with caveats.
like half a stamp.
Yeah, half a stamp.
Half a stamp. Well, it looks like we have landed the plane. Thank you all for listening today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show and tell a friend.
You can also follow us on YouTube and Instagram at MCL Podcast. Instagram is the best place to send us feedback and episode suggestions, so send us a DM anytime. Or you can also contact us through the Send Us a Text Message feature right there in the show notes.
Yeah, so send us some fan mail. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Bye!
Thank you for listening to Mid-Century Living. Please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave a review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. See you next Friday.